confidence and guilt into action. I'd like to acknowledge the Aboriginal philosophers, scholars, academics and intellectuals who are so very generous with their sharing of their knowledge and knowledge systems. And finally, I'd like to acknowledge and thank the Aboriginal colleagues and mates that I have, and you know who you are, who on a daily basis show me that although this work is deadly serious and it benefits all, and it takes strength and commitment and innovation, it's also a lot of fun. And it's the kind of work that I've found so incredibly satisfying and rewarding. So with that acknowledgement done, I'd like to now pass over to our Deputy Vice-Chancellor Academic, Professor Chris Ryan, way over there, very dramatic entrance, Chris, who has the privilege of introducing our amazing keynote speaker. So over to you, Chris.
Greg, can everyone just, there are some acknowledgements of country, and then there are some other acknowledgements of country, aren't there? There's a profundity and a wisdom in your words just now, Greg. So thank you very, very much for that important acknowledgement of country. Reflecting on your comment of, local but non-Indigenous, I've said this to Tracy in the past. My family originate from Aberdeen, where it is cold and blustery at the best of times. And many years ago, through many different fates, we found ourselves here in Australia, and it has been a delight ever since. I too acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we gather, pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and of course I extend that respect to all Indigenous peoples here today, as together we walk the path of reconciliation, guided through respect, through learning and shared responsibilities. I've been reading, if you have not had a look so far, can I invite you to go to the ABC website, where there is a piece right at the top of the ABC website, which is, I'm really glad that they're pursuing this with such thoughtfulness and rigour, of the history, the oral histories of Indigenous peoples across Australia. And when you think about ingenuity, just that single word, I invite you to have that word in your mind as you are reading through the struggles, the trials, the tribulations before the last ice age, where Indigenous people came here for the first time to Australia, and all of that history which far predates any type of history that I would have from my relatives way back when. We get all very proud and teary-eyed if we can get down in the Scottish side, down to something of a particular clan, because at that point we might be able to get back 1,500 years. Indigenous colleagues start laughing when you talk about those numbers, and for good reason. Today it's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Professor Tracy Bunda. Professor Bunda is the University of Queensland's Professor of Indigenous Education and has had a remarkable career spanning more than 3 decades, leading groundbreaking work in indigenising curricula and ultimately in supporting tertiary education across the country and indeed internationally. Tracy, your leadership has been recently recognised, and it's been recognised as driving real, but importantly, lasting change. And I think, Greg, you've spoken a little bit about some of what that lasting change feels like as it resonates for you, and I think for many of us in the room today. And that lasting change has been the creation of a sustainable global model that embeds Indigenous knowledge within and across higher education. Tracy, your outstanding contributions have been recognised through multiple honours, but perhaps we should pause and focus on one in particular, which was the 2024 Australian Award for University Teaching and the 2024 UQ Award for Teaching and Excellence. And with the Australian Award for University Teaching, I just wanted to point out, and I know our Vice-Chancellor has pointed out a few times, there is no obligation for that award to be presented to someone on any given year. It is an award that is very rarely provided. And it is a recognition of decades of work, of a career of work, and a career of positive change. And so it is with that that we give you that information about just how widely regarded, Tracy, you are. Today, I know, Tracy, you're going to share your reflections on how far UQ perhaps has come in indigenising the curriculum and the lessons we can continue to learn along the way. You know, the act of coming together to share stories and knowledge has been central to Indigenous cultures across Australia for countless generations. It's something we all honour and continue through gatherings like this, and I'm personally honoured to be part of the next steps on that journey today, as we all come together to learn from Tracy and from your insights. So with that, Tracy, thank you very much in advance for your leadership of the next little while together. And I'd like to ask everyone to please join with me in warmly welcoming Professor Tracy Bunda.
Yeah. Thanks. Thanks. Those probably look really weird sitting behind this thing. No, I've got to say it.
Just give us a second. Because I've got a big jolly voice, that's why.
Voice. I'm a primary school teacher. I've got a big booming voice too. Get down out of that tree now. Hello, everybody. Look, I'm sitting. My colleagues within the university would know that I've not been well. And yeah, so I'm just sitting. I wouldn't have the strength to stand for my talk. Can I thank Italy very much for asking me to do the opening address today. Guys, this will be one of the last official functions that I do within the university before I leave the university sector in January. And that will culminate 40 years of working in a university somewhere in this country. So thank you very much, Italy, for giving me this opportunity to speak. Thank you. I wasn't here for the Excellence Awards this year, but I do want to acknowledge all of the winners of the Excellence Awards, but in particular, I want to acknowledge the goddess Deanne Ganaway for her Excellence Award. She has had quite a phenomenal hand in indigenising curriculum, particularly at the beginnings of this journey at the university. I also want to acknowledge, I don't know if Emma's here, Emily McConaughey, for her Excellence Award, the work she did with social sciences, and the fabulous and unique Indigenous Library team for the work that they did around UQ Has a Black History, which is a really valuable resource. You know, if you're not quite sure where to start, at the very least, you can use that, you know, in the orientation period for students commencing studies at the university. The other thing that I want to do as a Ngugi Waka Waka woman, non-Indigenous people will know that as Quandamuka, Redland Bay, Stradbroke Island, Moreton Island area. And Waka Waka is Cherbourg community, a little bit north, a little bit west. You know, where I follow my dad's line. And so I live on Yagara country. I live in the western corner of Yagara country. And I just want to pay my respects to, in particular, to the Yagara community for enabling me to be able to live on that country. Not that we had any choice. Our family was forcibly relocated there generation ago. But since then, you know, we've been accepted into that community and are supported within that community. So I want to pay my respects there. And what I'm going to do today is give a little bit of a reflection. Louise, will you keep time for us? So it's, yeah, I'll pull up at 10 o'clock. Is that correct? Yeah, if I can. And then there'll be an opportunity to take questions from the floor. Because there are so many people in the room that I know and that I've worked with, can I just say thank you now? All right, in case I forget at the end. All right. All right, let's see, let's go. Okay. Done the acknowledgement. So one of the ways I thought that we could do this reflection is by having a look at what were named as enablers within the green paper, the white paper, and Diane actually worked with me and helped construct those enablers. And so what I want to do is use a little bit of a traffic light system just to sort of give us a little bit of an assessment of where we are in terms of all of those enablers. All right, the next one. Okay, so the COP, the Community of Practice, that has actually been quite successful. It's been instigated so that at least there's 3 to 4 meetings per year. That's facilitated by Italy, and it draws upon what good practices are happening across schools and faculties to be able to share that information. The cultural capability stuff, I want to drill down on this a little bit more later in this conversation. In all honesty, I would have to say that there are varying degrees of capability across schools and faculties, but also across the executive within the university. So I think the university, I think part of that response to Indigenising curriculum, I'm not quite sure where to start. Part of that may be appeased by engaging much more deeply within developing those culturally capable skills. Now, the university has set the cultural training modules within Workday. Oh my God, I'll never have to use Workday again. Don't tell Phil, he's across the hallway. But I think we need to move to a standard where if you are engaging quite deeply within an Indigenised curriculum, I think you should have completed those 10 modules. And I've said this before, are those modules perfect? No, of course not. But at least they are a conversation starter that can be applied to, you know, discipline areas that you're working in. So the emphasis at the moment is to complete 3 of those cultural learning modules. But I think if you are working quite deeply within this space, I think you should have completed 10. And I know that there are schools and faculties across the university who have taken up black card training. I know the School of Education has taken staff to Cherbourg, to the Ration Shed Museum, and received cultural training there as well. And I think all of that, those sorts of opportunities, we need to, actually, there's a gap. I need to make friends with people in business. There's a gap. I could do some cultural training on the sideline. All right, so that one I've given a yellow traffic light, you know, so we're engaging in that. I think people could engage a little bit more. Schools and faculties have a responsibility to develop that a little bit further. Thanks, Louise. When this Indigenising curriculum commenced at the university, what was set up was a working party, and there were ADA representation, ADI representation, student representation, Indigenous representation on that particular committee. We were very fortunate in the sense that we had Craig Franklin at that particular time. Craig was the prior president of Academic Board. Lydia, am I saying it right? Yeah. And one of the things that Craig had suggested was at the programmatic review level is an opportunity for the faculties to be able to think about what it is that they're doing within the IC space. Now, at the programmatic level, all program reviews go to Bronwyn as the Deputy Vice-Chancellor Indigenous. And so this added just a little bit more meat on the bones in terms of what it is that faculties and schools are doing in this IC space. With the formation of the Indigenous Learning Subcommittee, that has expanded to include new course introduction as well. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later on in the presentation. One of the enablers that we haven't addressed at all, and so what I'm worried about here is that there's no uniformity across the university. It becomes, you know, what's happening in Indigenous individual spaces. So if you are a school or a faculty that actually has relationships with Indigenous knowledge holders who are then contributors to Indigenised curriculum, what wage scale do we need to think about in terms of paying for that contribution? So not that there is a hierarchical knowledge system within Indigenous culture. I would say it's much more circular, but we do recognise that there are senior knowledge holders and that there are Indigenous elders. So if you are actually engaging with an Indigenous elder, what pay scale are you going to pay that elder in terms of their contribution? Hey, I think it's a really interesting, and I think it's a really important point. It sends a message to the Indigenous community about not only the seriousness of the university in this space, but I think also it sends a message about whether or not this university wants to engage with Indigenous people and wants to be respectful of that relationship. And I don't think it's an area that we do very well at. You could go, you could look in specific places around the university, particularly when you've got, you know, like Steve Salisbury does that field work with Gari, Fraser Island, takes the students up to Fraser. Daniel Schull, vet, out at Gatton, works with the Cherbourg community. Education has a number of elders that they work with in a block of teaching throughout the semester. You know, so I think they're just some of the examples, and I don't mean to be rude and, you know, neglectful in not naming other areas, but they certainly are the long held relationship spaces. So I think we can do a lot better in that area. I've given it a little bit, I didn't want to give it a red totally, so I've given it an orange. Yeah, don't anybody check my marking. I don't fail anybody. All right, so some of the other areas are, you know, resources, and the library has been really important in this relationship with Italy. And I know Louise and Anna are driving that behind the scenes. What we've tried to do there is build resources that are beneficial for the whole of the university, and maybe a little bit of a model as well, so that people can then develop specific resources. Stephanie, I've seen Stephanie before, Stephanie and Kath, had to think for a bit. Stephanie and Kath, they've produced information around Indigenising curriculum within the faculty. Steve Salisbury, Cohen have been instrumental in, is it an implementation strategy? It's a strategy for Indigenising curriculum over in science. You know, so we need those sorts of, that helps build all of the infrastructure. And as academics engaging in this space, we need to talk, write and publish about our scholarship, which is part of the reason why we worked on that handbook, to expose to everybody. I mean, I think there was 18 chapters, wasn't there, Caitlin? So there was this real contribution across the university, and for people to understand. Look, I think Indigenising curriculum is really easy to locate within the arts and the humanities field, but I think what that handbook shows is that Indigenised curriculum can be across the university. The next one. All right. Finances and budget. We started this whole gig without a conversation about budget. Stupid, Trace. You should have been marching across the hallway to Chris's door, who says, "What have I done this time, Trace?" But what we have been able to do, and this was, I think, at a teaching and learning committee meeting, that there is that thematic approach to the teaching and innovation grants. And so there was an opportunity there to ensure people had could put up projects around Indigenising curriculum. Those teaching and innovation grants are really important in terms of building the resources at the discipline level. Can I just say, and I don't want to, I'm not influencing, you know, the decision. I'm not cranky, all right? I'm not cranky. I'm just a little bit sad that the social science one didn't get up this year. It was really, really important, and I'll talk about why it is important. That was Gerhard's application. But what we don't have is some of that non-discretionary funding earmarked for things like engaging with the community, earmarked for paying for lectures. You know, we don't have that, and I think we do need that, and we need it at that faculty and school level. Diane and Caitlin were leading some of the work around HEA credentialing. So for those Indigenous people who do come into the university and do work around IC, here is an opportunity to be able to credential that work as well as pay for that work. And that will set those Indigenous people and that contribution apart. And Deanna and I had spoken to HEA, and they were willing to receive that. So not in the same way, but with an Indigenous lens on those applications. So that work needs to be continued. You know, just amongst all the other things Deanne and Caitlin got to do. All right. All right. So I just want to talk a little bit about ways forward. Louise, what's the time? Okay. All right. So we started off with a working party, and we've moved to, at the faculty level, set up these committees. Now, I know historically some, like in health, it used to be just the reconciliation committee, but with the appointment of an ADI within medicine and health, we've now got that Wisdom Council, the Indigenous Wisdom Council there. So whether it's a committee, an advisory group, or a COP, as they have chosen within EAT, we really do need that structure, not only to be working with committees that are teaching and learning committees that are established within the faculty, but they become really critical too for the Indigenous Learning Subcommittee, so that we, you know, we can have that cross university conversation. And then it will mesh with ADIs. Now, I do understand that Science and EAT are moving to establish those ADI positions, which is great. But that level of governance works with the teaching and learning committees, works with the Board of Studies. It informs the Indigenous Learning Subcommittee, and then that committee then moves recommendations to CAB before it goes to academic board. Look, there, the last bit of work that the Indigenous Learning Subcommittee, which I've been chairing, has been looking to develop a guide for Indigenised curriculum. And I do know that there's been quite a lot of response to that, both at CAP level, but also coming back down, you know, to people across schools and faculties. We do want to get that right. There was never any intention to be exclusive about that. And certainly we want to be able, when the guide does come, and it's a guide just for people starting, really, you know, when we were thinking about it, to be able to help people kickstart working in this space. You know, it'll be a live document. So as people work through it, and you can see what works and what doesn't work, and then it'll be informed again. So that governance stuff is really important. I think it gives it solidity. I think it gives it sustainability. The next one. All right. This is me talking to you as a black fella now. I think one of the things that's happening about Indigenised curricula at the university is that it's still sitting within the difference basket. And we haven't structurally moved to that place where an Indigenised curriculum is normalised. It's just a normalised conversation, you know, same conversations with, you know, having sat down 1 million of them, you know, with ADAs talking about what are the prereqs for blah, 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 you know, or whether or not we're going to keep this course or whether or not we're going to get rid of this course, you know. It should just be normalised within the university. If you get to that stage of IC as being normalised, you are going to be way ahead of the game. But at the moment, we're still in this clutching pearls. I'm not quite sure what I'm doing here, but we need to be able to move to that. And that's why it's really important to build all that infrastructure, whether it's the governance committee or the resources or whatever. Okay. And to do that, we need some thoughtful planning. Can we jump to the last one? And I'll come back to that one. All right. What you're reading there is from the introduction that I wrote to the handbook. Okay. Can we go back to the... I think that's why non-Indigenous people really struggle, want to come into this space, want to be really good allies, but don't know what to do and don't know how to do it. And that's because all of us have been denied that knowledge at the school level prior to coming into the university and taking up roles as academics. And I think one of the things that we need to be able to do in terms of, I don't know what I'm doing, I don't know where to start, I actually think one of the conversations that we need in the university, because I've done this with a really gentle methodological approach. It's always been my intention to take people with me, all right? But if you remember in the green paper, I defined Indigenous perspectives, Indigenous studies, and Indigenous knowledges. One of the things that we don't do in this conversation of Indigenised curriculum is we don't have a critical understanding about race. And part of the reason for me as a critical race theorist, part of the reason around I don't know what I'm doing is because we haven't thought about this concept of race within Australia, okay? Race Studies 1000. Who's raced? Who's raced in this country? Who is raced? And a lot of people and our students will think of Sudanese people, Aboriginal people, Torres Strait Islander people, Pacifica people. White people are raced. White people are a member of a race, a social constructed race as well. But we don't unpack that and what that means. And I think we need to move to that next, which is why I'm calling it an epistemological shift. We need to be able to move to that next level eventually, where we start to talk about, do you know there's no race studies degrees within this country? None. And we need to be able to do something about that. And I think UQ is in a, unique situation to be able to lead that conversation, and teaching Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous studies within the university has always been twofold for me. To be able to inform non-Indigenous people about what it means to live in this country and live with Indigenous people, but also for our Indigenous students so that they can see themselves in the curriculum and they can be proud of who they are, There's a conversation within the Indigenous community about who we graduate as Indigenous students. There's real concern about the indigeneity of some of our Indigenous students, who have got great qualifications coming from University of Queensland, but haven't had the opportunity to be affirmed within their indigeneity. That's a real concern. Stop taking photographs of me. All right. Next one. Next one. All right. So I'll leave you with those. I think if we've got the structure right, then we can feed into and receive knowledge, and we've got, different knowledge formation there. I think we do need to make that shift into talking about race, and I think we need better understandings about. I'm not talking like, taking $100,000 out of a faculty budget to drive Indigenous, connections with the community, whatever else is needed within, cultural capability training. Talking about small amounts of money that should sit within the faculty and school as well for Indigenised curriculum matters. All right. Thanks, Louise. Any more? That's it.
Tracy, I could listen to you all
No,
day.
you can't. I can't listen to myself.
No, I'm going to fanboy. I'm going to fanboy. Grab my notes here. Look, on behalf of everyone here, thank you so much for taking the time to share your insights and thoughts. And I know I'm not alone when I say the impact of your extraordinary contribution will be felt for days, weeks, months, years,
Thank you.
decades ahead. We have a very small token of appreciation over there. Oh, thank you, Louise. I was wondering how I was going to get those flowers over here. There are very few individuals that do this sort of work and have the sort of impact that you make. So please join me again in thanking Professor Tracy Bunda.
Oh, thank you. I'll say it again. Can I just say thank you to everybody that I have worked with over the period of time that I've been here at University of Queensland. I'm really glad I ended my career at UQ. Let's not get carried away though. A university is a university is a university. But it's just been really lovely that people have bitten into this space in spite of their fear, in spite of the challenges, but wanted to go on that sometimes a little bit crazy ride. I also want to thank the people I don't get along with, the people that I stand toe to toe with. Thank you for forcing me to, think about things differently. And to take that on board as well. I know you guys know me. I just want to say this because I feel like I've been captured as a teaching and learning expert only. Can I just tell you that I'm also a researcher? I sit within about, about $50 million worth of Indigenous research. So, and I'm really proud of that as well. As an old girl, 65 next year, ching ching, it's looking fabulous. Because the university has given me an enormous amount of skills, and I'm really grateful for that. But I'm going to give those skills to my community. So, and that's how I'll finish my working life. But thank you everybody who came on this ride with me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tracy.